Usually it's at the start of spring ball that we get to find out a little bit more about what's happening for Michigan offensively, defensively, and all of that. But Wink Martindale went on in the trenches today, gave us a little bit of insight defensively. I thought there were some interesting things that came out of that. We are going to talk all things Michigan defense per the defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And this is the most bipolar weather I've ever seen today. Like stormy, sunny, stormy, sunny. I don't know. I don't know what it's like towards you, but it's bipolar. Anyway, let's talk about Wink Martindale. Lots of interesting things that came out of his In the Trenches interview. I think that the first thing that I want to address is just, again, it seems like he's kind of entrenched at Michigan. And I think that a large part of that, and he didn't say this, but it's just kind of my own take, is the way that things kind of coalesced late in the year. Because early in the season, things were not going that well. It was hard to tell, like, is Wink having a good time, right? But then the way things ended, and he talked about that. He talked about staying at Michigan and all of that stuff. It kind of became like, okay, I think that just the trajectory is good. So let's start with him staying at Michigan, the whole thing there. He said that it would take a lot for me to go back to the NFL. And I told both Ward and Sharon when I took this job that I would listen to anyone. And I think I'm where I'm at in my career that really I deserve the right to do that. And it was one of those things where things weren't perfect anywhere or anything else. So I'm just going to stay at Michigan because I do love it here. And I said, that's not just recruiting. That's not anything else. I do love it here. And I love the players here. And we had a lot of fun, especially towards the end of the year. And I'm looking forward to starting all of that over again. I do believe that, right? Like he said earlier that the whole thing would be like, if someone wants to back a Brinks truck up to my house with just a ton of money, that I'm not going to ignore that. That's certainly going to be a possibility. And it is a possibility still, right? Like if he, ends up having a defense that's akin to 2023 Michigan, some NFL team's going to be like, okay, he's back. He can do what he can do. And they're going to consider it. Now, that said, because the NFL also, though, I think this is where this plays in Michigan's favor, is that it's become a youth-oriented league in a lot of ways, and you see that with the head coaches, right? Starting with Sean McVay and McFleur and all of those types of guys, and then even Mike McDonald. It just seems like they really want to, the dude that's coaching JJ over at Minnesota. Love my memory. It's on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember it. I can picture his face. That doesn't help you at all. Nonetheless, I think that helps. The fact that Wink, he's saying like, this is my 41st offseason that he's going into, right? I think that his age, it doesn't necessarily fully preclude him, right? Like you've seen, Pete Carroll gets a job, right? Like it doesn't fully preclude him. Certainly Jim Harbaugh got a job last year, but it doesn't help. Certainly, like you have to be able to overlook it. So I think that is a big part of it. As far as the second half of the season, like I said, I think that those things correlate, right? Because if it was just continually not going that great, now granted, NFL teams weren't probably going to keep, come calling at that point. But what I think ended up happening is everything just kind of worked out in a way that was really beneficial. He's talking about the game here. And one of the things that he mentioned here is he said, we had 2 timeouts. So if we called a timeout, they're going into third down. And I said, okay. I told you on Monday that this is going to be your game. What do you guys want? And they told me they want what they wanted. And the secondary told me what coverage they wanted through the coaches, through the assistants, and just sitting there talking. I asked Mason, I asked Makari, and it was just a really cool thing to see it work out the way it worked out because they made plays. You saw the plays that they made in the playoffs, and they just were not going to be denied. I think that kind of shows like what the move, right? Like the fact that it became more of that NFL style. In that sense, right? It became something where it was, it wasn't just like, hey, I need you to do this and you're not doing it. It became like a player-led scenario, and I think that really helped Wink out quite a bit. Talking more about what was different the second half of the season, he says it kind of started with Indiana. It's 18 yards in the second half. Weird birthday for me and all around. That was on my birthday. Didn't go to that game, if you recall. It said that the number one thing that was the physicality we played with, the technique, the fundamentals that we emphasized all year. I think really everyone got a better grasp of it going into the second half. When you talk about the Ohio State game, and I said it before, it's the physicality we played with. Just after the game, it was like they refused to let anything affect them during the game because situational football, and we played great situational football in that game. And the seven change, that's Makari moving over to nickel, was a part of it, and it was great. It was fun for me to be a part of with the kids watching them play. So I think that's where he started getting enjoyment. That's what's going to keep him around, right? It's going to take something that's just going to be continual, right? Like, is him feeding off the players who are feeding off of him. Because if you're just going to come in and you're going to be like, this is my defense and you need to run it, and kids aren't having fun, and, they're not necessarily taking ownership, because that's the big thing. It feels like what happened was the players started taking ownership of the defense in a way that they maybe weren't before, because they already were a physical defense, but they got more physical. It became more about what the Michigan defense is capable of. It became more about Wink's vision coming to life and the players really buying in. Now, that said, I think as long as he has a situation where it's kind of like that, especially if it's that all year, and he can see players grow, because that's the thing. I like to use the biblical principle for a lot of things. You know a tree by its fruit. Well, if the fruit is rotten, or it's just okay, or it's just bad fruit, then no, you're not growing anything good, right? The tree itself is bad. But if it's a situation where the fruit, it's taking a little bit of time to develop and it ends up being good, you don't really want to, cut that tree down. So with that in mind, I think that Wink is going to be in a very good spot as long as that tree can continue to grow good fruit. And I mean, that's a lot of that's going to be on him, but it's going to be on the players as well. And I think it would benefit Michigan greatly to have him for multiple years. Because then you got consistency. We know what Wink is capable of as a defensive coordinator. As long as they don't keep making dumb substitutions and have weird exotics, and they kind of got away from that, then I think everything's great. So we're going to continue on. He broke down some things in the front seven that I want to talk about, and he broke down some things on the back end. So that's what we're going to do for the rest of the show. We will get to those things here in just a moment. But before we do, get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Well, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it is your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, if you use the promo code SH5, you get 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. If you're watching on video, don't mind me. I'm just wearing a sweater I haven't been able to wear in 5-6 years, and I'm wearing a shirt I haven't been able to wear since summer of 2022. I weigh the least that I have since 2020, beginning of 2020, not like throughout, beginning of 2020. So like George Clooney said after coming off of Argo and losing weight, how do you do it? Move more, eat less. Not that I haven't tried that over the years. It just never worked. I don't know why. So excited to be just slightly over 200. Let me tell you what. I was 240 pounds in November, and I'm 205 as of this morning. That's just incredible to me. That's just incredible to me. All right, I want to talk about, like, he's talked a lot about the guys going pro. How many, I mean, that's great and all. I've learned enough about Michigan fans. Y'all don't really care that much when they're not on the team, unless you have bragging rights. If it's Tom Brady winning Super Bowls, you care about it then. But the moment that he stops doing it, you stop caring about Tom Brady, right? Like, that's just how it goes. So Wink was asked about the front seven heading into spring. Remember, I think that's the strength of the team. I think that he's kind of like, he doesn't really want to say it, but it kind of, I mean, obviously. So we're going to get to the front here because he talked about Rayshaun Benny. He addressed the Jaishawn Barham. It's kind of what I thought it was going to be, what he had to say about Jaishawn Barham. So we'll get to that, but let's start with when asked about the front seven, he says, I think the strength is their hunger to show that there's not going to be a drop-off. Obviously, talent-wise, there's going to be a drop-off because they're not talking about Ike the same way that they were talking about Mason Graham or Trey Pierce the same way they were talking about KG. So whenever you want to use comparative-wise, but they have that hunger that they're going to keep the tradition of the Michigan defense right where it's at, and it's fun to watch, and you can see them growing. A lot of these guys are going to be seeing them now after 5 weeks in the program, and Ike being one of them. He had his shirt off today, and I'm like, hey, Ike. But there's quite a few guys like that. You still have guys who played last year on defense, and they're not going to let it drop the expectation of where our defense is going to be. We saw that already. That's, I think, the thing. Like, if we didn't see it in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Alabama, there would be questions, and we'd be sitting here saying, like, I don't know. I mean, he's not wrong. Like, you know, Ike Iwunnah is not Mason Graham. Trey Pierce is not Kenneth Grant. But they certainly played very well against the starting Alabama offensive line, which is a very good offensive line. So that bodes very well for what we expect. And that's where he starts talking about Rayshaun Benny. Now, I am excited because we always, you know, the Michigan fan base, I don't know that we're going to see Ike Iwunnah in the form that Wink is talking about, but the OMG shirtless thing was a thing for a long, you know, decades here. Michigan fandom always wanted to see that transformation. That's, I think, at least where it's going to be exciting in spring ball to see the transformation of the defensive line in terms of that. But also just to see, like, because again, the depth there, because he mentioned Ike and Trey very specifically. Then he has a whole section on Rayshaun Benny. You know, they're bringing in Damon Payne and Trey Williams. And I'm excited about Travis Moten. He's like the type of guy that I would venture to guess that I'm going to ask about Travis Moten when we get Wink, presumably at the beginning of spring ball. I almost guarantee that that's happening. But he talked about Rayshaun Benny. He said he knows how to lead because the guys who were in his room, the guys who used to being around with Mason and KG, keeping in mind, he's the same, isn't he? He's a year older than them too, right? Like, he came in 2021 and those two guys were 2022. Interesting. And he said, the cool thing about the Northwestern game of how the veterans reacted to the other guys coming into the game and playing in the game is there was no drop off. I think the same thing with Rayshaun. He knows what it's supposed to look like. KG, when I called the timeout at Ohio State, he said that he was gassed. I mean, he's going to be a fun guy to watch. He knows what he needs to work on and what it takes and what it's going to take for him to get to the next level. So I think that, like, we saw that as well with the ReliaQuest Bowl, right? He was a game wrecker. Rayshaun Benny looked every bit the part of the third guy in that rotation. And I think that bodes extremely well, right? Like, we know he's number one. It's going to be who's the next guy next to him, right? Is it Trey Williams? Is it Trey Pierce? Is it Damon Payne? Is it Ike Iwunnah? Is it someone else, right? They've got so many options. But I think that when you hear essentially like he's following in the same footsteps as his predecessors, even though he'll have been there 2 years longer, that's not, again, I don't mean to just be like ripping on him, but that's not like the Donovan Jeter thing, right? Like the Donovan Jeter thing every year was like, he's coming on, watch out, he's coming on. And then he didn't. You're right. Like that was the Donovan Jeter thing every single year, like spring ball, fall camp. Oh, watch out. Rayshaun, we've at least seen it. And you felt like he was a reliable third, even in 2023. And then last year, there were times where he was coming in and you're like, I know I want to see Mason and KG, but do we have to take Rayshaun out, right? That's kind of the good place to be as far as that's concerned. All right, now on Jaishawn Barham, like I said, this is kind of what I was thinking we were going to hear and in a way hoping, and it's pretty much what I've been saying. So here's what I had to say about Jaishawn Barham. He said, moving to edge, that is. He said, well, we did it last year with him as well. I think what we need to do for him is practice him more on the edge than what we did last year, but still use him in the same ways that we have. It all depends on how some of those some of these young linebackers come along to the inside guys, because Brian Jean-Marie has done a heck of a job changing that room around. And the talent we brought in is going to be fun to watch for years to come. You mentioned the talent in developing that. Not only is it the starters that want to find a way, it's not just the guys that left. We can do it as well. So it's kind of what I've been saying, right? Like it's a difficult proposition for me, knowing how Jaishawn Barham played down the stretch to make it a permanent move. And it sounds like it's not, right? But if they find a situation where it's like Troy Bowles comes on strong, or, hey, we can start playing Nathaniel Owusu Boateng right away. More likely it would be Cole Sullivan or Jimmy Rolder or maybe even Jaden Hood, Jason Hewlett. And now I'm just naming linebackers. Like if you have a situation where some of those guys come up, then you might say, all right, we can miss him. We can miss Jaishawn Barham, but it kind of also sounds to me like it will be package dependent and that he's mostly going to stay at that role. Like they'll practice him more at edge, but it isn't a permanent role to edge, which I think is the right way to go, right? I think it's a good idea to say, we're going to have some, it's not the same, but like we're going to have some Josh Uche type packages for you, but we also still want you to play the middle linebacker spot. Because at least it gives you a different look, because if you can have two linebackers in the middle and still have Jaishawn Barham and move him out to edge and have like, you're offering yourself that much more flexibility. You're offering yourself, depending on what the package is, depending on what the down and distance, what the other team is showing, all of that kind of stuff. It just offers you more flexibility to do some different things, right? Because Michigan loves to be a nickel, and that's probably not going to change. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need to be a nickel if you are in certain situations, right? You might be able to say, we can have essentially three edge rushers out there on the field, one coming from the Sam linebacker position, and then two who are up front. You could have, and then just say, like, we're just going to cover 4 with 4. There's just so many different options that you could have at your disposal. You could still have the nickel and run that. You could still have just all kinds of things that you want to do as far as that's concerned. Let's talk about the secondary. Talked a little bit about 5 different players, so let's get to that here in just a moment. All right. Let's we're not going to necessarily do a heck of a lot of reading here as far as the quotes, but let's start with Rod Moore, who I think this is a little bit troubling, is that 14 months, he says, Wink Martindale, and Rod's still not running. So he was ahead of schedule until he wasn't, and now he's definitely behind schedule, right? Because you expect a year down the road. Like, remember, we thought Rod Moore was going to probably return by the Ohio State game, and here we are months removed from that. 3 months out, 4 months out. I don't have any concept of time. 3 months still, because that was the end of November. So 3 months out, and he's still not running. So I'm not sure that we're going to see Rod Moore in spring ball, but I think that what that also says is that there's a lot of work still to be done. The good news for Michigan is that you have other safeties. He talked a bit about Brandon Hillman and Mason Curtis. That Mason in particular seems to have just like this knack through study, through just knowledge and all of these things. And what makes him such a good safety is the idea that he just kind of has a nose for the football, a nose for where the quarterback's going, knows how to read things and all of that stuff. Brandon is a little bit more obviously physical and instinctive. I do want to read the quote there just to be able to kind of make sure that I'm keeping myself in check here. It says, it's just different because the way he does it, he has a natural explosion going through whether it's a tie down or a wide receiver or a quarterback. He's going to be a fun guy to watch this year as well. We've just got to keep slowing things down for him. His next step is learning how to disguise coverages and things like that because he didn't have many mental busts for us last year when he was in there. He knew his job and he lined up in it and had blinders on to everything else, so we've got to expand. So that's good, right? Entering year 3, expand his role. I could see him starting out opposite Rod Moore, but you might find yourself in either Mason Curtis, Brandon Hillman, TJ Metcalf, Brandon Hillman, TJ Metcalf, and like there's a lot of possibilities with safety that open things up. But that's obviously not where a lot of my concern is. It is at the other part of the defensive backfield, and that is cornerback. So he did talk about Zeke Berry and said, like, this is what he had to say. I guess the way I was reading a little bit. He went from safety to nickel to outside corner because of injuries. I think at the beginning of the year, we're going to start him at outside corner. So that answers that. Yes, he will still be corner. I think that's a good move, especially because he said kind of later that we might have worn him out at nickel, playing him there all the time when we need to do some different things with him and others during the season, but I think it'll help him. So I think that's good that they're going to continue to keep him at the outside corner position. That's what we've been projecting all offseason, that he will remain there. I thought he played his best there. I don't agree with those who say he was bad at nickel the whole time. I think the first 3 games he was very good at nickel. And I thought the first half of the USC game he was very good at nickel. And then he had the mistake, the mistaken blitz, and it felt like things fell apart from there. But it was like he got new life going to corner. That's my thought on that. But then he also, and this was kind of the more troubling thing, asked about Jair Hill. He said it wasn't a heck of a lot that he had to say there. He said, I just think you keep throwing double moves at him and he'll build that confidence where he can see and play it and knows which ones to jump and which ones not to. He was just trying to jump everything early, and that's what got us. You would have liked to felt like the improvement was there a little bit. Because again, you have to figure it's going to be Zeke and Jair unless something happens in the transfer portal. And you don't really want to see a third-year guy not starting either, right? Like you just kind of, you just don't really want that. I mean, you're going to have that in some places. Obviously, you look at that at safety, and they're going to have some guys on the bench that are third years or maybe even fourth years because there's just so much depth there. But corner, they don't have that depth. So, I mean, that Jair's going to play, but you want to hear more about like what he does well rather than what he doesn't. But it's good, I guess, that we're getting a little bit of insight as to what he doesn't. So there's that. So all in all, I mean, again, the defense just feels like it's just in such a positive place. Wink being back for another year, keeping the consistency, having every single position coach returning, having gotten the glimpse again, that glimpse against Alabama kind of gave us everything, because we saw like if you can. Because it's one thing if you see it against Ohio State and then they play against Alabama and Alabama's just able to dominate the middle without Mason and KG. And that didn't happen. I mean, it was just so destructive up front. And that, they had their moments where they were able to move the ball, but Michigan only allowed them to get into the end zone once, right? Like how often do you look at Alabama with what it was? I understand that maybe the offense wasn't quite as good as people were, making it out to be. You look at what Alabama did in the first half against Georgia. Right, like they were just absolutely dominating. So they have that capability, and Michigan shut it down. So with that in mind, I mean, that just tells you like, okay, as much as I sit there and look and say, okay, Oklahoma, they're relatively high in SP plus. They've got a lot of returning production, particularly on offense. They bring in John Mateer, and that's kind of like, okay, maybe that can fall apart. But at the same time, if this basically the entire group that for the most part minus Amir Hall and Makari didn't play in the bowl game. Quentin Johnson did, though. Like minus just a couple guys, really, you're running all of those guys back, and that makes you feel like, okay, they're in a good spot. And I think the great thing about that is it's not just consistency, it's building. And it's kind of like what Wink said earlier about building onto things, adding more to the plate, because now guys have a little bit more of the foundation. They didn't forget the things that they were taught last year. Now you're able to build on it, and that's not what we got to see a lot from Michigan over the years, right? Because it usually felt like you had a lot of turnover in one place or the other, right? Like Don Brown was the defensive coordinator starting in 2016, and it was pretty good right away. But then he has a full team turnover as far as personnel going from 2016 to 17. Then you go from 2017 to 18. There was a little bit of coaching turnover. Then everything goes awry that last week of the season. You go to 2019 and they had more turnover, in terms of players, right? They lost a lot of those guys from 2018. And then just to fast forward, Mike McDonald for a year, 2 years of Jesse Minter, some turnover even from year to year as far as the coaches underneath them. Right now you're running everything back. So you have a foundation that you can build on, a foundation of actual stone. It's not sand, so you can just build upon that. And that's just going to bode so much better for Michigan, because now you've got players who have done it, even if they haven't done it for a long time, right? These guys weren't starters, they were rotational players, but they got to play against Alabama and did an exemplary job. You can build upon that. That is the greatest part of it all. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Tomorrow we will traditional mailbag, and we will do it from there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.